afternoon here on the reserve, but that has not stopped the Nkuhumas. And this... Good afternoon and welcome to an incredible day so far here on Djuma Private Game Reserve. As you can see, the Nkuhumas have taken down another buffalo that seems to be slightly, well, it was, of course, taken down because of the droughts. Now, as you may know, I am Taylor. And on camera with me this afternoon, we've got David. And aren't we so fortunate to have experienced something like this? Now, they took down this buffalo about an hour and a half ago. Isn't that amazing? And we were able to sit here and just come around the corner and be surprised by this incredible scene. Now, we know it's quite sad, of course, and this is nature. It's one of those things the lions are taking opportunity of all the weakened buffalo at the moment. But this won't last for long. In a couple of months' time, when we get our proper rains and the grass comes through, we know that the buffalo are going to take their revenge. And it's going to be a lot more difficult for these lions to take down buffalo. And that's what happens, is that the tables turn. One moment it's in favor for the predators, and before you know it, the herbivores and that what used to be preyed upon on a regular basis come fighting back. Now, isn't this amazing? Well, the little cubs, though, seem to be enjoying the buffalo. The adults, not too bothered, and are quite enjoying the cool wind and having a nap and just relaxing. However, I can only see 4 lionesses here. Oh, no, maybe there's another one. Can you see? I can't see 5. David, can you see them? I also only see 4, but it seems as though all the cubs are here. And it was indeed Amber Eyes who took down this buffalo. We were very privileged to catch the end of it, literally the last 10 minutes. We heard the distress call, so we came to see what was going on. And we found them just like the way they are now. Now remember, you are watching a live safari. And myself and James would love to hear from you today. Perhaps this is your first time watching. So if you'd like to chat to us or send in any questions, you are more than welcome to do so. And you can do so by hashtagging Safari Live on Twitter, and then also sending in questions to questions@WildEarthTV. Now, I hear young Mike is back from his holiday. I suppose I should let him know the good news. Mike for Taylor. Welcome back. The Nkuhumas have killed another buffalo. It's just myself here. We are at Woolburg, Twin Dams Junction. Here we go. Now my duty is done of informing the rest of the reserve of the Nkuhuma's success. Now, they haven't, of course, really touched the buffalo at all. Like I said, the adults have been resting, but perhaps in a little bit of time, if we're patient enough, they will come here and they will start to feast on the buffalo. I've got good news for you too. One of the Birminghams is around, but we'll try and have another look at them a bit later. But let's go back over to James, who's dying to say hello. Isn't that exciting if James gets it right and manages to catch the wild dogs? That'll be fantastic. It seems as though we may have a good afternoon ahead of us. Now you can see a couple of the little cubs have got sort of, it looks like they're wearing lipstick this afternoon. And something that we see quite often is, well, that we know that they're not strong enough yet to open up that carcass. So they're not covered in blood. Like when the adults go in and do open up the stomach cavity, those little ones will climb inside, and they're small enough to reach all the incredible little bits. And it seems as though they were just eating around the very sensitive area on that male buffalo. And now they've full bellies, and some of them have gone back to the adults to have a groom. It seems as though that lioness has had enough, though. And you can see they're not fat. So they're looking on the lean side, so hopefully they will start to eat. It is lovely and cool here this afternoon. We're suspecting some rain, hopefully by this afternoon. Now, Miss Orr, you're wondering why the lions killed a buffalo if they're not hungry. Now, lions are opportunistic feeders, and this means that regardless of whether they're on another kill or not, if there's an opportunity to come around to potentially take down an animal, they will do so. Now, the Nkuhumas are the exception of the rule when it comes to lions not being very successful hunters. Normally, they say out of every 10 attempts or so, they'll only catch something every 3 times. But they do have an advantage at this time of the year. Because we haven't had much rain and all the grass has disappeared over the last couple of months during the winter months. And now as we come into the last month of spring, we're getting a few downpours of rain. But the animals really are tired, they're hungry, they've exhausted all their fat reserves, and a lot of them are not as strong as what they normally would be during the green season, so when we have a lot of rain and grass. And therefore this makes it sort of an easy capture for the lionesses. For example, it was only the one lioness, it was Amber Eyes, that took down this buffalo all on her own. Now normally that would be quite a difficult thing to do if it was a fit and healthy buffalo. It's not a particularly old one, it's a younger male, possibly only a couple of years old. You can see he hasn't quite developed a big boss just yet. And this is what we've been seeing over the last couple of days, even actually the last few weeks, as these younger buffalo obviously struggling to keep up with the breeding herds and lagging behind. Maybe they were on their way to drink from the Djuma pan, and unfortunately he was just too far behind the rest of the herd, and then Nkuhumas caught up with him. Now, like I said, one of the Birminghams is here. I think it's going to be very difficult for us to get a view for the moment, but it was Mfumo. We did also briefly see Tinyo, but he doesn't seem to be around anymore, so I wonder where he's gone. And what I'm hoping is going to happen is when they are brave enough to come over to the carcass, I'm hoping that we're going to see a bit of a dispute going on, especially once all the lionesses and all the cubs get up and start to feast on this carcass. But some of the little cubs are not quite ready just yet to wake up. You can see the one that's flapping its paw in the air, though, had an early start. You can see by the red on its face. You need to have a good groom. Looks like it's got a leaf stuck to its face as well. But as the day cools down even more, the wind is blowing quite heavily, like I said earlier. We are expecting rain. I think that these lions are going to wake up and make their move towards the buffalo. Let's have a little look now. I said that it looked like there was possibly a leaf stuck on its face, but let's see if we can have a closer look as to what that was. And of course, now you know that we're live in case you were doubting it, as I say that the little cub disappears behind the other end of the buffalo. And that's what happens with things like this. But don't worry, we'll probably get another view again. And you can see that one little cub is tucking in, like I said, to the sensitive parts. They're getting their adult teeth, and they're starting to grow bigger and bigger every time we see them do a yawn. We're able to see how large their teeth have become. And soon enough, they'll be able to tear open that buffalo hide for themselves instead of having to wait and rely on the adults. But look at all those ticks as well that are covering that buffalo. The flies are also starting to settle in now. And they'll probably stay there for a couple of days before they eventually move off. Maybe even some of them will come loose and move straight onto the lions, a new live host. Now, if you're watching a couple of days ago. Oh, sorry. Now, Stephanie, you're wondering if all 8 lion cubs are here or if they're still with the one female from earlier this morning. Now, not certain. There's definitely one lioness missing. Amber Eyes is here and the youngest female is here. So it's possibly lion with the 2 middle cubs is not here. I didn't get an opportunity to count them all as they've been moving around quite a bit between the carcass, and of course they were in the drainage line a little bit as well. But hopefully as they start to come through, we'll be able to count them. I must have miscounted earlier. I thought I counted 8, but I do stand under correction, of course. We'll try and have another look. Now, if we have a look at this lioness, she's come over to the carcass now. And you can see that she's drinking. You see that? Now, I think that's quite interesting, because I don't think that is blood. You can see her tongue doesn't seem to be becoming red, which it normally would. So I wonder if that's some form of a liquid coming out of the buffalo, perhaps from the nasal cavity, or maybe it's digestive juices, I'm unsure, but she seems to be enjoying it. Now, this is something that we see with lions not having to drink water all the time, because they get a lot of moisture from the blood, and then of course, like we just witnessed, from them drinking various liquids that start to ooze out of the buffalo once it is passed on. Now, I was about to say, sorry, a little while ago, if you were watching a couple of afternoons ago, I mentioned that I'd like to do a little experiment with Nkuhumas, and I said that I was going to try and give you a statistic and a percentage of how successful these lions have been in a 6-week work cycle. So it's probably just shy of 6 weeks, but I'm going to start having a look at Panthera, which is a carnivore project and even just an endangered species project that goes on particularly here in the Sabi Sands, but they've started to develop it throughout Africa now, where they don't just monitor lions, but they do leopards and serval and caracal, ground hornbills, all these beautiful animals. And what that project does is we basically record all the information when the Nkuhumas have made a kill, what species they killed, and the sex of it. So we'll try and work out from the 16th of October to the 19th of November how successful these Nkuhumas have been in that period. Because like I said, usually not very successful, lions of course, but in this case, but it's absolutely incredible. Now, you see these little ones have taken a bit of a they've sort of stopped feeding on the carcass now and decided that they've built up enough energy to have a little play. But it's not too serious, not like we normally see them bounding around and around, jumping on top of each other. Perhaps we'll see that a bit later. Now, what is on that cub's chin? I can't work out what on earth that is. It doesn't look, I don't know if it's hurt itself. I don't think it would be playing like that. Let's see if we can get a better view. No, turn around and look at us for long enough, more than 2 seconds, so we can have a good view. I wonder if it's not just a piece of flesh from the buffalo that's now stuck onto its lip. You see that? Yeah, you see, I was worried at one point that maybe it had been kicked in the face and it had loosened a chunk of flesh, but it doesn't seem that way. It seems as though it's either a leaf that's been covered in blood that's now stuck onto that lion cub's chin, or it's a piece of flesh from when it was feeding on the buffalo. Now you can hear the youngsters having an argument as they're fighting over the one small spot that has already been opened on the buffalo. And this will probably continue until these lionesses open it up. And that liquid is still oozing out of the buffalo. I'm not sure exactly what liquid it is, but we saw her lap it all up. And then she'd finished it. And then since she went over and started biting on the belly, we've now seen that more of that liquid has come pouring out. So it's quite interesting. It must be a digestive juice of some sort that's now leaking through the nasal cavity and perhaps the mouth as well. Very, very interesting. And all the cubs now learning from that lioness and doing exactly what she's just done. If you heard that sneeze, and you can see the little cub glancing over into the distance, that's because Mr. Nkuhuma is laying fast asleep. But we'll go and have a view at him at some point, hopefully once he becomes a little bit more active. And I can tell you now, you're all going to be very surprised as to how well his injury on his face has healed. Wonderful. I believe that James has just arrived on Cheetah Plains. How exciting is as to how creative the people are that I work with the amount of nicknames that I get all the time. T-Mac, T-Bomb, Straya, you name it, I get them all. Now this is another lioness that's got up from the one that we saw earlier. So let's see if she's going to be the one that decides to open up this buffalo. And then, well, it'll be quite interesting to see as all the little cubs, I presume, will come around and fight over this carcass. I've even seen a couple of vultures that were circling a little bit earlier. So that's not good news for the Nkuhumas. It means they're going to have to protect this carcass, otherwise it's going to be eaten. And you can see that that little cub is now scratching on the tree. You can see the beautiful claws coming out, which are normally kept hidden in the sheath of the paw to try and keep them nice and sharp and protect them, of course. But that didn't last too long before something else caught the attention, and I think it's that buffalo's tail that they've been playing with and fighting over. And I don't know if you've noticed as they start to play how their behavior is starting to change. Did you see that little one, how it had its ears flat back and snarling? And it was indeed the tail that they were fighting over. Did you see that? Let's see if they're going to keep pulling it. Now, it's obviously difficult for them to play with it, especially when it's still attached to the buffalo. They're very entertained with something back that side. Now, I would love to go around, but unfortunately there's so many thick trees that you can see that I don't think we'll get a very good view. So I think for the moment we've got the best spot in the house, and I think we will hold our ground here so that nobody takes it. I, of course, want the best view for all of you watching. I don't know if you can hear Mr. and Mrs. Hornbill singing. Oh, there we go. Now the cub has got the tail. And unlike us as children, and I was actually talking about this the other day, how I was given plastic containers or Tupperware and boxes to play with because that was my favorite thing. You've got to make your own toys out here, and we often see the Nkuhumas playing with branches and climbing the trees. But when there's an opportunity to play with a buffalo's tail, I think that choose that over and over again. Now this lioness is looking over. She's maybe just keeping a watchful eye on that male lion. It seems as though he's sat up now. I don't know if we'll get a view. Should I go back for you, David? Let's quickly go and say hello to Mr. Nkuhuma. Maybe he's going to come over. But like I said, you're going to be so surprised when you see how wonderful he's looking. Now, it feels as though it's been years since I last saw the Birminghams. Of course, it hasn't been years, but when I saw Tinyo this earlier today and Nkuhuma, they just look like they've grown. Their manes are starting to darken, but maybe you'll be able to decide for yourselves. Hello, boy. Here he is. And look at that. Oh, big yawn for us. Oh, lovely. Look at his face. Can you believe that big gaping hole that was once there is now healed up to just a small little gash? And it's hardly leaving A real scar. That's incredible. Now he's waking up. I wonder if his next move isn't going to be perhaps around to where the carcass is. And of course, don't we just love it when they scratch themselves and they find the right spot? Look at that beautiful teeth. You can see he's still a young boy. But you'll see, if we get to see Tinyo wherever he may be, wherever he is gone, his mane is gone very dark and very black. Another big yawn for us. And look at those, did you see all those little sort of barbs that they have on their tongue? That was incredible. Nice shot, David. It's always nice to see how sort of dense they are and how large they really are, because we see them obviously licking and removing the hair from their prey. Well, it's got to be almost like sandpaper to be able to do something like that. Yeah, he's got the spot again. Now you've had your siesta. I think it's time you go over and say hello to the ladies, because they haven't seen each other for quite some time. And I suspect what happened is that as Amber Eyes was taking down that buffalo, these boys must have heard that buffalo distressing, and they came marching over to see what all that ruckus was about. But they've kept their distance. The lionesses have showed a little bit of animosity towards them, so they're treading carefully. So it'll be interesting to see what their reaction is. They don't look particularly thin, even just from here. He looks as though he's got a bit of a belly. So it's good to know. And perhaps that they have been feasting. Here he goes. He looks like he's making his move now. What I will do, though, is when he comes past us, I'm just going to change the angle of the vehicle, just so that we can watch him as he walks towards the lionesses. But isn't he looking strong? They really look like they're developing nice muscle around their shoulders now. He's just marking his territory. Let's try and get a better spot. We're going to try and sneak in this gap. There's some other vehicles that have arrived. Now, I suspect that we won't be able to stay here for too long. Probably only another, maybe we can push it to about 10 minutes. But that's fine. We'll let everybody else come through and we'll come back. I'm just going to go forward here. Hi, big boy. The reason being is because we want to get a good view as he approaches these two lionesses, which intentionally moved out and laid in the spot when they saw him approaching earlier. Now let's see what happens. Oh, that little cub is very excited. We know how much they love the Birminghams, and I'm always impressed by the behavior of the Birminghams with the cubs. They're very, very tolerant of them. But you see, being submissive, you see that ducking its head, coming in low, which is very clever of the cub. But be careful. Oh, there we go. They're actually lovely boys in the sense that they seem to be very good fathers, which is not common with the male lions. There he goes. He's marking his territory, as they haven't been around here for a couple of days. Just making their presence known again. Look at those little cubs looking up to their dad, so proud. And of course, now we want to play with you. Now, as we sit here and we see that these lionesses are watching him carefully. Star, you were wondering, why don't the lionesses want this male lion to eat? So that's not really the case with what's going on over here. Is often when the male lions come through, because of their size, they charge through and they will take over and try and dominate on a kill, which is obviously not great, because most of the time it's the lionesses that are doing the hunting. Of course, the boys help out. But these boys haven't been around, so they had nothing to do with bringing down of this buffalo. And it seems as though this male is sort of respecting that. He's been edging closer, just moving slightly, sort of just trying to gain the trust again of the lionesses. We've seen, and over the past, I think it's about the past 2 or 3 weeks, we saw a bit of disputes happening between the lionesses and the 2 Birmingham boys, and then again between Nat.Geo and Nkuhuma, as they were mating with the youngest lioness and Amber Eyes. But Nkuhuma seems to be, if I can say this, the nicer of the 2 boys. His attitude seems to be a lot more calm, a lot more relaxed. He tries quite hard with the Nkuhuma females. I have to agree with you, Liz. Liz says that she thinks that the females tolerate Mr. Nkuhuma more over the other Birminghams, and I do, and I think it's because he puts effort in. And we don't normally see this with the females, but he makes a concerted effort to go up. He greets them. He doesn't just come charging in and race over to the kill and start feasting. Look at the respect that he's showing these lionesses. You saw the distance that he was at. Remember, we got here earlier today, and when they came over, they stopped probably about 5 or 6 times from 100 meters and started itching their way forward. And then he laid in the distance and waited. And now he's approached even closer. And, sorry, I'm just looking behind me quickly. And now he's sitting there waiting as well. And it'll be nice to see if he does get up and perhaps go over to those lions and nudge heads with them. And even just his behavior with the cubs. We see Mr. Nat.Geo, he's not too bad either, but he does get a bit grouchy and grumpy sometimes. Where Nkuhuma doesn't mind if the cubs jump on his head and on his back and bite his tail. I can tell you, from what I've experienced with other male lions, this is the first I've ever seen them being so tolerant. The Charleston males, which I often talk about from down in the south of the Sabi Sand, are horrible towards the cubs. They're constantly fighting. As soon as the cubs approach them, they growl or take a swipe at them, and then all the lionesses get up and try and chase the males away, and it ends up in big arguments, and it happens every single time. But perhaps it's because they're young boys and they don't know. Maybe they've been bullied by these females, which is a great thing, I think, in terms, instead of being those big boisterous lions like males have that reputation, and like I said, I've seen it my whole life. Maybe they're just young enough that these females are really showing them who the bosses are, and strength, of course, comes in numbers. So it would be very silly of him to try and hurt one of these cubs, whether it was by accident or just out of frustration or on purpose, and to have 5 lionesses turn around and come at you. He would get himself in a little bit of trouble. Even though he's bigger than them, he'd probably come out with his tail between his legs. So I think he's very cautious. And I'm really impressed with these Birminghams now. When I first arrived, I thought, oh, they're not proper lions. And I forgot how young they were. But just in the past 2 months, I've definitely seen a change in the darkness of the mane, muscle build-up. Now, Sir Rob, you're commenting and saying, is it perhaps because Mr. Nkuhuma is not hungry that he's not being so aggressive? I've seen it when they were even thin, and him approaching a carcass, and it doesn't just come racing in and chasing the females off like normally male lions will do. So I don't know, I think they've just got a different temperament. Well, he has got a different temperament, and I don't know what has caused that. Maybe it's genetics, maybe, like I said, maybe it's the fact that he's outnumbered big time here, 5 females versus just him. He seems to be the one that hangs around with the Nkuhumas the most, and of course Mr. Nat.Geo comes in at second, just popping his head in every now and then. But he looks like he's completely moved off. He's not here anymore, I don't think. I've had a good look around. So perhaps he's gone off to do a territorial patrol and he's left Nkuhuma here. And now we're going to watch. Let's see what his reaction is. He hasn't seen these cubs for a couple of days now. No, he's actually more interested in the lions. Now, that's the youngest lioness that he's gone up to greet. You see that? You don't normally see that, which I think is really, really wonderful. Look at them. It's like he's forming bonds with the different females. You see, rubbing heads with everybody. This is fantastic. And just earning their trust. That's really lovely. This is a beautiful moment. They're also very curious of him. Maybe they've missed him. Maybe they are learning to love Mr. Nkuhuma. He's turning into a beautiful lion, though. Even though he's got those scars, his mane has become huge. Look at the young lioness. She's actually very excited. Oh, that's not the youngest lioness. Where did she go? She was here. Oh, yes, there she is. Sorry, she's sitting on the right. And all coming over to say hello. And I'm so glad to hear that you're all taking lots of screenshots of this beautiful moment as the pride is reunited with Mr. Nkuhuma. And what a nice scene it's turned out to be. A little cub also getting in on the greeting ceremony. And of course, everything that they see, they will copy. And that's how these animals learn, a lot of it is instinct, but social bonds, of course, I think that they observe and then they put that into practice. Now, I think Nkuhuma is searching for perhaps an area where maybe one of them were lying, or maybe someone's urinated there. But of course, that's just a yawn. That's not him phlegm and grimacing. But now we'll wait and see what his next move is. Oh, it's my favorite little girl who's getting all cleaned up. And she does seem to be a bit of a dirty cub. Every time I see her, she's either got leaves and grass stuck on her, or she's got a bit of mud on her paws, or at the moment she's been feasting on the buffalo and playing near the tail. So it wouldn't surprise me if she's been covered in a bit of buffalo feces. And obviously Mom is not too impressed with that. And I don't blame her. You can't go out in public looking all dirty like that. You're a little princess. You've got to be nice and clean. But I think her ear is looking better. Now, we were chatting about it, and I don't think it's flopping as much. It's still obviously quite swollen, and I think that's what's causing the ear to flop, is the fact that the tissue is all swollen, creating that ear to become quite heavy and then dropping down. So we'll see as this mange clears up. She's looking good. Perhaps so will her ear. Oh, big stretch. Here we go. Sharpen those nails. I'm sure that feels good on her little tendons to give them a good stretch out, but not for too long. I don't think they really know what to do. Wonderful. I think what we're going to do is we're going to leave the Nkuhumas now. I think there's a couple of guides that want to come on in, but we'll come back a little bit later. Perhaps they'll go for a drink. So keep an eye on the dam camp. Let's go see what else we can find, and let's go see how those wild dogs are doing. Have a look at that incredible sight. That little cub fast asleep on the tree. And luckily for us, it seems as though a couple of the lions have started feasting on the buffalo. Well, they haven't yet opened up the stomach and removed the intestines, which is normally one of the first things that they do. But I suppose when you're the Nkuhumas and have been as successful as what they have been, there's no need to rush this process. And I think that's why they are being so relaxed, because if somebody else does come through and try and steal their meal, there's always opportunity to catch another buffalo. But let's listen to this little cub as it fights with one of the adults. Being very cheeky, trying to tear into the rump, but not doing a very good job, I'm afraid. But you can see, desperately trying. And I think that's the only way that these little cubs, if they do find a little gap, that they're able to get through that hide, is by tearing quite quickly and hoping that they just rip small pieces open, and then hopefully after doing that, they'll eventually create a big enough gap that they can feast on the flesh. Now, you can also see where they've started to open up the stomach. They've managed to get through the first bit of the hide. Can you see that? And you can even see how thick it is. Look at how incredible that is. That's a couple of, maybe an inch or two thick. Or maybe not even that much, but it's pretty thick, probably about 2 centimeters or so. And then you can see the stomach, then that's just the stomach, the outside layer. But I wonder if their next move is going to be to pierce through that now that there's a big hole. Now, Gareth, it's great to hear from you again, and I'm so glad that you've got into asking all these questions. Now, you'd like to know, in my experience, if the Nkuhumas are very, specifically specialists in hunting buffaloes, because they are indeed successful, like you mentioned. Well, let's just quickly go back here. I just want to watch this little cub as it growls around. Now, I agree with your statement, and in my experience, they are very, very successful. Oh, look at this cub now climbing on top of the buffalo. Gareth, I'll get back to your question. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten. Now, there's obviously not a lot of room where everybody else is sitting on the edge of the buffalo, so the only other option is, well, to go and climb on top of it. But unfortunately, that didn't last for long. So let me get back to your question quickly then, Gareth. So it's typically in the winter months when the buffalo, or the dry season, let's refer to it as the dry and the wet season. So we get our rain in the summer. So normally from early spring, from September right through up until about February we can get rain. And then in the dry season coming into autumn and the winter months, we don't usually have any. Oh, a little bit of a dispute there. You can see the sort of, not jealousy, that's the wrong word that I wanted to use there, of course, but getting a bit antsy with that other cub getting too close. Now, in these drier seasons, these buffalo are so weak. We saw earlier how you could see their ribs, how you could see their hips. They're not in great condition. So yes, now they're taking as many as they can, but it's going to change. As we come into summer, the buffalo are going to be stronger. They're going to be a lot more difficult to take down. So we may start seeing the lions feeding on things like impala lambs. It wouldn't be and not common. Same thing with warthog piglets. They'll start to take them. We saw that a lot last year. As well as taking things down like kudu. Kudu often form a large sort of part of the lion's diet. But it all really just depends. Now, looking at this carcass and looking at the carcass that we saw earlier that was covered in maggots quite close to Buffelshoek Dam, Samantha, you were wondering, how long does a carcass take before it becomes spoiled and can no longer be eaten? Now, the answer to that is never. It never gets to the point where nothing will feast on it. So even a lion, at the moment the lions are spoiled though, because there is an abundance of food around, that they are able to be picky. And we clearly saw this a couple of weeks ago, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where the lions came across a carcass. It was riddled with maggots like the one we just saw. They sort of tugged on it a little bit. Then they moved on, and we came and went through a thick bit of vegetation. They came across a buffalo that had been stabbed by another buffalo and was dying because of those injuries. He was bleeding out, essentially. They also tugged on him, and then they heard the distress calls of, I think it was 2 females and one of the Birmingham boys taking down a buffalo, and it was distressing. They then left that second buffalo and went to the young calf which the others had caught, and they'd fed on those. They didn't go back to the other 2 carcasses. How incredible is that? But that's only because of this period where there's an abundance of food around. In the summer months, I can guarantee that would have gone completely different. They would have feasted. They either would have gone to the buffalo that was being taken down, and they would have come back and feasted on the others. Now, can you hear that? Now, that's her using the carnassial shear. That's her scissoring with her teeth, trying to either cut through the flesh to get into the better parts to feed on. Or what she could also be doing is, this is normally when it gets to the end of a buffalo carcass and there isn't much meat, is they try and remove the chunks of flesh from the skin, and they often do the carnassial shear is what it's called. But Samantha, just to get back to your question, they will eat rotting meat, the vultures, the hyenas, the lions, the jackals. The only one that might be a little bit reluctant to feast upon a rotting carcass is a cheetah. But even then, I can promise you, if that cheetah is starving and there's nothing else for it to eat, it's not going to say no to a carcass. There we go. It seems as though she was successful, and she's managed to get through to the hide now and feasting on the rump, which is one of the first areas that they normally start eating at. And of course, that young cub is taking full advantage, and obviously learning as well from that lioness on how to do the carnassial shear and developing its own technique to get inside the carcass. And then if we look on the left, we've got another young cub who's biting around the joint of where the elbow, I suppose, would be on the buffalo, and trying to tear into the flesh from that end, but struggling, as you can see, fighting with the carcass. You can even see where they've been chewing on that poor buffalo's ear at one point. You can just see how the hair has been removed. There we go. They were chewing on that at some point. I don't know if I'd like... Can you zoom in anymore? Is that it, David? Look at... Can you see the ticks inside his ear? It's quite difficult to see, but I don't know if you can maybe see it, but there's actually... Its ear is completely infested with ticks. That is terrible, those big lumps inside there. My goodness. I'm glad that we don't get ticks deep down inside our ear like that. That wouldn't be very pleasant. Now, I'm sure a few of you are wondering if those ticks have arrived now, or were they there on the buffalo before it passed on. And it's actually very healthy for animals to have tick populations living on them. You won't find an unhealthy animal with very many ticks. And of course, like humans, and we often hear and we see on our cats and dogs as well, if you're living out in the wilderness, whenever you go into the bushes, the doctor always says to you, you must remember to check for ticks when you've come back, sort of behind your legs, behind your knee, to check around your ankles, to check in any warm area, so your groin, underneath your arms. And it's the same with the animals. The ticks like to go to the warm and the moist places, so between the back legs, underneath any folds of skin, so between their legs and their chest, in their ears, under their neck. You can see them all, they've congregated over there. So it's the same thing for the animals. So even though this buffalo was on the thin side, it obviously wasn't too sick that the ticks obviously needed to leave the buffalo. Normally when you see that they've got diseases and things, they'll have very, very, very few ticks on them. Now it's getting to the point where it's getting quite dark now, and you can see there's a little bit of light that I've put onto the lines, but what I've done is I've put one of the LED lights on, so I'm not shining the spotlight. So it's not one direct source of light, and I'm not shining directly on them. It's bouncing off the ground, and those rays are spread quite a bit, but we won't stay here for too long. And this is a personal opinion, because none of these cubs, well, there's only one set of cubs that are 6 months old. The rest of them are still too young, and we generally don't spot on them with a proper spotlight until they're about 6 months. And one of the reasons is that sometimes this light can draw and attract predators or highlight the predators. And I would hate if a clan of hyena came through here with these young cubs, and you know, we were of course going to be the reason that these cubs were spotted. So that's one of the reasons why we don't shine a spotlight on young animals. You'll see often with leopards, if they're young leopard cubs and the cub and the kill is on the ground, a lot of guides won't actually spot on the kill. But if it's hoisted, obviously it's a different story, because a hyena can't climb up a tree. We know how hyenas like to follow leopards and lions around, of course. So I think we're going to just have a little longer look for a couple of minutes, but then we are going to move away and leave these Nkuhumas. But for now, it's all right. It's still relatively light. It's obviously just because the clouds have come over. You can see. Ooh. It's the two cubs having an argument about who gets to feast on the best spot. But like I said, for now it's all right. We've got a couple more minutes that we can hang around with them for before the sun actually completely disappears and we lose all the light. I can see, what I'd normally try and do is I normally try and gauge it on my eyesight. If I can see about 50 meters into the distance, then I reckon it's still okay. But as soon as I can't see further than that, then I think that it's the time to leave them until these Nkuhumas are a little bit older. But like I said, that's just a personal preference. We're all different. And you can see that lion cub's actually struggling a little bit. There is a small hole from where they removed the sensitive bits of that buffalo. But buffalo's foot is in the way, and every now and then you see, ooh, it getting squashed. Now, Carrie, you were wondering if it would be easier for these lions just to claw straight through the buffalo, and unfortunately not. So their claws are designed for gripping and holding on nice and tight. But they haven't got strong claws like you see on a cheetah or on a wild dog or a hyena or anything that would use their claws to dig. You see them, they're able to retract their claws and protect them. So they're not strong enough at all to dig through that hide. That hide is so tough. So the easiest way is to gnaw through the hide and make a little incision, and then of course tear it open from that. And I reckon by tomorrow morning they would have opened up this carcass, especially once Mr. Mfumo decides to come around and have a bite to eat. But he doesn't seem to be too interested at the moment. I think what are going to do is we're actually going to move forward. I'm going to leave these lions and the cubs eat, but I think we can go up ahead and spotlight the other adults because they don't seem to have any cubs around. It's now getting very dark all of a sudden, so let's just move forward. But thank you guys, we'll try and get to you in the morning. Right, let's go see what Mr. Mfumo is up to. You can see his head is down, let's put some lights on. Where's my spotlight? My spotlight is here. Some of the cubs are fast asleep, they're not interested at all. They must have had a very busy day. Actually I'm gonna do this. Hello guys. Oh, no, sorry, my bad. I thought I put it in neutral. I obviously didn't. Sorry, David. Now, even with the adults, I actually haven't even bothered. I'm just going to adjust the LED light. I haven't even bothered with a spotlight, just because relatively close proximity. And I find that these LEDs work really nicely, and they're not as harsh on the animals. Now, I know some of you haven't ever been on a safari, but when we shine the spotlight, we don't actually shine directly into the animal's eyes. We shine on somewhere else on the body to illuminate the face. Because you can imagine if you were to shine these spotlights, which have got quite a few lumens, it would actually hurt their eyes too. So something like this, these LEDs really come in handy where they're a lot less harsh. Now he's getting up. Let's see what he's going to do. And I also find that these LEDs cast some nice shadows. Rebecca just said they look beautiful. So you'll see me just every now and then turning the LED. But he looks very interested in this female. Who are we? Who are we over here? Now he's phlegm grimacing. He did test her to try and pick up her scent. Now, what's the verdict, mister? She doesn't look very impressed by that notion. Perhaps you need to tread cautiously, Nkuhuma. No, Niki's brain is working overtime now as he tries to think about his next move. But first, a big stretch. He's rubbing up against the tree, which is typical of this male. And as he turns his tail up and he sprays the urine, we definitely know that he's marking his territory. Hello, big boy. And now he's just going to sit back down and perhaps have a nap again. Yes, that's exactly what he's doing. Now, I don't know where the Birminghams have come from, where him and Mr. Tenyo had walked from, because I don't think they were on... I wonder who was here last night. David, you and Jamie had a male lion. Who was it?
I'm not sure.
I can't remember who exactly was... David seems to think it was maybe Tenyo. Oh, there we go. You were spot on. It was indeed Tenyo that Jamie and David had last night. But Mr. Nkuhuma wasn't around, as far as I'm aware, so I wonder where he's come from. And it's nice to see, though, that these boys are out and expanding their territories. Because when I got here, I only saw them with the Nkuhumas. And I think that they realized, oh, we actually have to go out and do a bit of work and go out and mark our territories if we want to keep this area. Big arguments going on back at the carcass, but it sounds like it's just the little ones fighting again. And it's going to get worse and worse as they age. And maybe that's why these lionesses are taking a bit of a break. Maybe they're just like, no, we don't need that in our lives anymore. We'd rather go and feast when the little ones have got a full belly and they can sort of eat in peace. Because every time we've seen any arguments happen around the carcass, they always seem to be instigated by the young Nkuhuma cubs. Can you hear all that noise going on at the back? Now, of course, they've gone quiet. Isn't this lovely? But it looks like these lions, unfortunately, are going to rest for a little while longer. So what I would really, really like to do, I'm just trying to look for all my goodies down here. I would really like to move on from these lions now. I think we've had fantastic time with them. And let's go see if we can find anything interesting that's lurking around after dark. Now, I'm just trying to rearrange a couple of things. I've got wires hooking on wires, and I want my spotlight cable to come out a bit further. There we go. Now I'm a little bit more organized. But thank you, Nkuhumas. It's been wonderful. Let's turn the lights on.